Ethan froze as a strange, faint scratching sound echoed through his quiet cabin. The old house creaked often in the winter chill, but this was different, persistent, almost frantic. He followed the noise to the living room, his heart racing as he pinpointed its source, the air vent near the base of the wall. Grabbing a flashlight, he crouched down and shined the beam inside. Two gleaming eyes reflected back at him, wide and terrified. "Stay calm," Ethan murmured to himself, as much for his own nerves as for the unknown creature. He unscrewed the vent cover with trembling hands and carefully pulled it away. 4 tiny lynx cubs huddled together inside, their small bodies shivering in the drafty air. They looked frail, their fur patchy and their ribs visible beneath their thin frames. For a moment, Ethan simply stared, overwhelmed by a mix of awe and dread. Where had they come from? And where was their mother? He extended his hand cautiously, but the smallest cub let out a sharp, pitiful yell. It pierced the silence and cut straight to his heart. Ethan knew nothing about wild animals, but leaving them there wasn't an option. Gently, he gathered them in an old blanket, their tiny claws catching on the fabric. As he cradled the trembling bundle, a weight of responsibility settled over him. Whatever this was, it wasn't just their survival on the line, it was his, too. Hi everyone, welcome to our channel. Today, I'm excited to share a new story with you. Please subscribe us. Ethan quickly discovered that caring for the lynx cubs was no simple task. They refused the bowl of milk he offered, their small heads jerking away whenever he tried to approach with food. They were wild, after all, and every instinct seemed to tell them to distrust him. The smallest cub, with its wide, wary eyes, trembled whenever he moved too close, while the boldest one would hiss and swat at his hands. Frustration gnawed at Ethan. He spent hours researching how to care for young lynx, cobbling together makeshift meals of soft meat and formula. Eventually, hunger won out, and the cubs began to eat. Their personalities started to shine through as they adjusted to his presence. One cub, with a tiny notch in its ear, became the most curious, poking its head out of the blanket to watch Ethan's every move. Another, with a silvery coat, was the troublemaker, pawing at his shoelaces or batting at his sleeve whenever he reached down. But just as things started to feel manageable, the scratching in the walls began. It started faintly at first, just above the ceiling in the corner of the room, then grew louder and more insistent as the hours passed. Ethan lay awake in his creaking cabin, the sound sending chills down his spine. The thought crossed his mind, but he quickly pushed it away. No. It couldn't be her. The next night, there was no denying it. A low, guttural growl resonated from the walls, a sound that sent the cubs scurrying deeper into their blanket nest. Ethan sat bolt upright in bed, his heart pounding. The mother lynx was searching for her young, and she wasn't far away. He could hear her outside the cabin now, pacing beneath the windows. Her sharp claws scraped against the wooden siding as she circled, her cries growing louder and more desperate. The sound was both feral and mournful, and it made Ethan's stomach churn with guilt. He had taken her cubs, even if it was to protect them. What would she do if she found her way in? The next morning, Ethan examined the cabin, searching for weak points in the structure. That was when he found the first signs of her determination. Clumps of insulation were scattered near the corner of the house, where she had begun ripping at the walls. Nearby, claw marks streaked across the window frame. Panicked, Ethan called a local wildlife expert, explaining the situation in hurried whispers while keeping an eye on the cubs. "She's trying to get in," he said, his voice shaking. "Stay calm," the expert replied. "Don't confront her. The snowstorm has delayed us, but we'll be there in a few days. Just keep the cubs safe and secured in the meantime." The advice was cold comfort. The storm had blanketed the forest in thick drifts, isolating Ethan in his cabin. The mother lynx, undeterred by the weather, seemed more persistent with each passing night. She began prowling closer to the windows, her glowing eyes reflecting in the moonlight as she peered inside. In the chaos, Ethan found himself bonding even more deeply with the cubs. The boldest one was the first to climb onto his lap, batting at his coat zipper before curling up and falling asleep. The smallest cub, once the most skittish, began inching closer to him, cautiously nuzzling his hand when he offered food. He couldn't help but smile at their antics, even as the mother's haunting cries echoed outside. But every joyful moment with the cubs carried a pang of guilt. Ethan knew that time was running out, and the mother lynx wouldn't wait forever. The storm raged outside, wind howling and snow piling against the cabin. Ethan had just begun to drift into an uneasy sleep when the crash jolted him awake. The sound came from below, sharp and final, like glass shattering under immense force. Heart pounding, he grabbed a flashlight and crept toward the basement door. The air was thick with cold as he descended the stairs, every creak of the wood amplifying the tension. When he reached the bottom, his breath caught. The small basement window had been shattered, and snow swirled in through the opening. In the dim beam of his flashlight, he saw her, muscular and tense, the mother lynx. Her eyes glowed like twin embers, and her low growl filled the space, a sound of pure, primal warning. Ethan froze, the flashlight trembling in his grip. Behind him, the cubs let out soft, frightened mewls from their blanket nest. The mother's ears flicked toward the sound, and her growl deepened, her body crouching low as if ready to pounce. Ethan raised his hands slowly, his voice calm but unsteady. "I'm not going to hurt you," he whispered. "You just want them back, don't you?" The lynx's gaze shifted to the cubs, her pupils dilating with urgency. Her powerful frame tensed, but she didn't attack. Ethan took a cautious step back, then another, giving her space. His heart hammered as he moved, each step feeling like a gamble. The mother lynx advanced, her movements fluid and deliberate. She reached the cubs and paused, nuzzling each one as if to reassure herself they were safe. Then, with surprising gentleness, she gripped one by the scruff of its neck and backed toward the shattered window. Ethan watched, his breath shallow, as she disappeared into the storm with the first cub. Moments later, she returned, her fur dusted with snow, and collected a second cub. This time, as she turned toward the window, she hesitated. Her piercing gaze locked onto Ethan, holding him in place. It wasn't aggression, there was something deeper, a recognition, a silent understanding. For a long moment, neither moved, the storm outside muffling the world. Then, with a final low growl, she vanished into the night, leaving Ethan alone with the last two cubs and a heavy knot in his chest. Ethan sat on the cabin floor, staring at the empty blanket nest. The storm had quieted, but the weight of the mother lynx's visit lingered. Only two cubs remained, curled together in the folds of the fabric, their tiny bodies warm against his hand. Moved by the mother's fierce determination, Ethan felt a renewed sense of responsibility. The cubs were more than just a challenge, they were a connection to the wild, a reminder of its raw, untamed beauty. For the next 2 days, he devoted himself to their care, despite the exhaustion. He ensured their meals were consistent and warm, cradling them with a gentleness he hadn't known he possessed. When the wildlife experts arrived at last, Ethan felt a bittersweet pang. The experts, bundled against the cold, carefully prepared a crate for the cubs, explaining that they would be taken to a nearby sanctuary where they could grow safely before being released into the wild. "You've done well," one of them said, watching Ethan's hesitance as he handed over the smallest cub. Ethan nodded, forcing a smile. He knew it was the right decision, but as the truck drove away, a quiet emptiness settled over the cabin, mingled with a reluctant sense of relief. Weeks passed, and the cabin felt eerily silent without the cubs. Ethan often found himself staring out the window, searching the forest's edge for any sign of the mother lynx. The sanctuary sent updates. The cubs were thriving, growing stronger and more agile every day. One crisp morning, as Ethan gathered firewood, movement caught his eye. Near the tree line, the mother lynx stood, her fur sleek and healthy. Beside her was a larger male, his presence protective and steady. For a moment, the mother's sharp gaze met Ethan's. She let out a low, haunting cry, and in it, Ethan heard a mix of gratitude and wild defiance. As the lynx pair melted into the shadows, Ethan felt a bittersweet ache. The forest had reclaimed its own, leaving him with a profound respect for the fragile line between human and wild, a line he would never forget. If this story touched your heart, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel.